Good day. My name is Lebum Tembu, and this is Africa Talks Business, live at the ESG Conference at the Santon Convention Center. We are currently joined by Mr. Pieter Scholtz from KPMG. Sir, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. What do you hope will come out of this conference?
So, look, this conference will mean very little if the participants don't go back into their businesses and really embrace the impact construct that ESG needs to bring. Yes, we need to be compliant. If you think about the ISSB standards, the GRI standards, we want those compliance components to be there.
Yes.
But we will not move the dial. We will not improve broad stakeholder value if we don't think about this in an impact manner. So that's what I really hope is going to happen, that the participants will realize that ESG creates stakeholder value and shareholder value, and therefore it doesn't only have to be a compliance thing.
And why do you think ESG is so important for companies?
Well, very simple. ESG is, with probably digital transformation, the two key themes that will mean or make companies successful in the future. So companies that don't embrace this, that don't make sure that their strategies have this at the core, will most likely become irrelevant in the near future.
As I was sitting there, one of the main messages that I was able to gain is how there is value, for businesses in doing the right thing. There is profit in doing the right thing. As Clarissa put it, profit with a purpose. So what do you think are the benefits of an ESG strategy for a company such as KPMG?
Well, there's many benefits, right? So, for instance, if you do ESG right, you can actually grow your top line. We know from research that was done that sustainability-linked products generally grow about 5.6 times more than non-sustainability-linked products. That's pure top-line growth. So if you get your strategy right in that way, you can grow top line. We know that if your decarbonization strategy, and maybe let's think about it broader, net zero,
yes,
you incorporate waste and water into that, that if that's done well, your cost will reduce. So that's growth in bottom line. Okay? Then we also know that with the changing demographics in the workforce, millennials becoming the biggest percentage in the workforce, Gen Z's moving up, there's a fundamental change in mindset to say, I want to work for a company whose purpose is aligned with mine.
Yes.
Okay. So that is quite a key change. And we know that if you look at Gen Z's, 80% want to work with companies that is aligned with their purpose. And if they do, they generally stay about 3 times longer than if their purposes aren't aligned. Now that immediately comes to productivity. People are more productive, there's less attrition, so you need to upskill less. And that again goes straight to revenue generation, to profit line. And then possibly the last thing why this is so important from a financial perspective is research that was done by McKinsey says that about 30% of a company's profit is linked to their regulatory strategies. And ESG legislation is coming. It is. We're seeing the movements in Europe big time. We're seeing some countries in Africa already starting to embrace some parts of it. Our own Reserve Bank has already said they're going to expect banks to be compliant with the ISSB reporting standards. So if you get this wrong, then 30% of your profits on average, based on the research, is at risk. So ESG needs to be a core part of your strategy, even if you don't want to think about stakeholder value, just thinking about shareholder value.
Yes. And, going on risks now, what do you think are the top ESG risks the world is currently facing, and how do we go about addressing them?
Look, I think firstly it's difficult to say the world because every area has different risks that's facing it. Certainly one of the key destabilizers from a broad ESG perspective is the fact that it has become a politicized thing in the US. So we're getting a lot of that in the media. And unfortunately, with the Republicans and the Democrats at each other's throats, ESG has sort of been destabilized a little. But we're seeing Europe making a big impact, right? Lots of legislation coming out. So their challenge is more to get companies to really understand what is coming, what needs to be in place, and to drive that. From an Africa perspective, our whole primary risk profile when it links to ESG is centered around the S. We are not a big polluter globally. So if we drive decarbonization as hard as we want to or can, and the rest of the world doesn't do anything, we're not going to move the dial much. But yet we know that we are some of the biggest, or we are impacted the most by climate change.
Yes.
The poorest places in the world are by far seeing the brunt more than the more developed areas. And then we sit with a social construct where we are going to have to make sure that we get everything that is required for a sustainable society right in our social work that we do.
Right, thank you. In closing, obviously South Africa is facing an energy crisis right now. So to get your perspective on this, what sort of impact has it had on your company?
So look, the energy crisis on a company like ours has had a much less of an impact than it has, or direct impact. It had a secondary impact just on how many of our clients are really adversely affected. For us, with the whole energy crisis, also our own decarbonization strategies, trying to get to net zero ourselves. It has had some continuity considerations, but with the energy crisis that we are sitting with and seeing or realizing that in South Africa we're probably going to have fossil fuels driving our energy for many decades still to come, that places an additional burden on private sector companies like ourselves to make sure that we do get to net zero carbon and try and get all our power from renewable sources.
Right. Well, Pieter, thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, take care. All right. This is Lebum Tembu from Africa Talks Business, live at the ESG Conference at the Sandton Convention Center.
Got him.